Hey everybody, welcome to the Thoughtful Bro. We are back after a 2-week hiatus. I'm so happy to be here with Nick Butler today. A few words before we get started on this week's amazing episode. We're live streaming on a Mighty Blaze as usual on both our Facebook and YouTube pages. Thoughtful Bro is here every Tuesday at 2 for what makes great books tick and what makes great authors tick. A Mighty Blaze, for those who might not know, is an all-volunteer initiative to help writers reach readers virtually during COVID and now hopefully beyond COVID. It was looking a little bit better a few months ago, but COVID or no COVID, Mighty Blaze will be here. You can find scores and literally hundreds of our past interviews from not just Thoughtful Bro, but our other hosts as well on our Mighty Blaze Facebook and YouTube pages. We're not asking for money at a Mighty Blaze. We are just here to connect readers and authors. If you want to support us, the real way to do that is just to like us and follow us and retweet us and subscribe to us and follow our stories and things like that. You can follow us, like us, and so on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. You can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, which of course is free, and we don't spam anybody. All we do is send out an email every Sunday evening that just says, here's the interviews coming up this week. So you can arrange your week craftily around our brilliant interviews. If you are in the mood to spend any money, please spend it on works that expertly bridge the divide between the commercial and literary, books that deliver you a thrilling story alongside a diagnosis of the capitalistic American dream. Books like Godspeed by Nickolas Butler. We'll have time for audience questions at the end. Whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, just pop your questions in the chat and they'll make their way to me. I'm psyched to say next Tuesday on Thoughtful Bro, we're going to be talking with the international bestseller, Shelley Parker Chan, who's going to be talking about her debut fantasy novel, which is called She Who Became the Sun. She's going to be beaming in live from Australia, so that'll be cool next week. But on to this week, folks. Author Nickolas Butler was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania, raised in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and educated at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, which for those who don't know is sort of like playing for the Yankees in creative writing. We'll talk a little bit maybe at the end of the interview about Iowa and what that was like. His first novel was the internationally best-selling and prize-winning Shotgun Love Songs. He went on to publish a book of short stories called Beneath the Bonfire. In 2017, he published The Hearts of Men. And in 2019, his fourth book, Little Faith, came out. He's written for Plowshares, Narrative, and the New York Times Book Review, among other publications. Prior to publishing Shotgun Love Songs, I love this part of your bio, Nick, he worked a long list of jobs, including, but not limited to, coffee roaster, liquor store clerk, office manager, hot dog vendor, author escort, meat packer, bed and breakfast manager, telemarketer, and Burger King maintenance man. Today, he's married and lives with his wife and 2 children on 16 acres of land adjacent a buffalo farm in rural Wisconsin. His latest book, Godspeed, is a brilliant morality tale about 3 down-and-out construction workers who get a too-good-to-be-true offer from a wealthy, reclusive woman to build a mansion at breakneck speed. And as they chase the money, darkness closes in. Nick Butler, welcome to the Thoughtful Bro.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. I'm all juiced up after a couple weeks off. So first, if it wasn't clear from my little intro, I loved the book. It was just the perfect blend, and we'll get into this a little bit later, of kind of somebody, it's sort of like my favorite kind of book, which is somebody with the true literary chops who moves into genre tropes a little bit and starts using some of the real tried and true mechanisms of genre, in this case, kind of a thriller heist-y story. And I mean, to me, that's always like the perfect blend. But anyway, enough of me rambling. Why don't you just tell us in your own words what the book is about?
Yeah. So back in about 2014, we finished construction of the house where I'm talking to you from, and a family friend of ours stopped by to check it out, and he started talking about this multi-million-dollar house that he was building not far away. And the guys on the construction crew slipped behind on the building deadline, and the homeowner got everybody together and said she would offer each of them a 5-figure bonus if they could get the house finished in the next 3 weeks. And my buddy turned to me and he said, "Nick, if we had all the meth in the world, we couldn't have finished that house in 3 weeks." And I thought, that seems like a really good idea for a book. But I couldn't see placing it in Wisconsin for some reason. I don't know what it was. All my other books are set in Wisconsin, but I couldn't see it. So the idea kind of sat around for a while, and then we took a family trip out to Yellowstone and came down through Jackson. And I was pretty naive, I think, at the time. I thought Jackson was just this like quaint ski town. I thought, oh, like, what does real estate cost here? Could we live here? And I didn't realize that that it's like one of the most exclusive places to live in America. So that was interesting to me. And then we traveled about 45 minutes southeast of Jackson, went camping in the Bridger-Teton National Forest at this hot springs. And I would sit in the hot springs every day and just think like, well, what if this wasn't public land? Like, what if somebody owned this? And that's when I knew that was where the building site would be. I could up the ante of the sort of class conflict, the wealth disparity. I could up the ante when it came to weather and winter time approaching. And then I knew I had it. So.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great origin story for the book. I love that it was just sort of like came from a real life thing. And then, it's one of those origin stories that, it's like it starts as this little tiny seed, just a throwaway remark almost, right? And then it just kind of like incubates and grows and grows. How long was it between when that remark was made to you and the book actually you started writing?
5 years. 5 years. Yeah, but it was like such a juicy remark, and you're a writer. I mean, like, if you're a writer, you're listening for shit like that. That's a gold mine, and that's what I really wanted to call the book early on, was All the Meth in the World. But that's probably not very marketable. And I'm happy
you made the right choice. I think you made the right choice.
Yeah, and my agent Rob McQuilkin suggested Godspeed, which I think is a very, very good title. I'm really happy with it. But yeah.
And by the way, I did think, and I hadn't seen this said anywhere or anything, but I was wondering, is Godspeed an actual like play on words because speed is a type of methamphetamine and like that's intentional?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously Godspeed is a sort of salutation like to a astronaut or a sailor or something like that. Take good care and go fast, go with speed. I think the book is maybe a little bit about faith, so you have that going, but there's also the playfulness of these guys are taking serious drugs, so.
Yeah. And then could you hold up the cover of the book too? Because it's one of the better covers I've seen in a while. Yeah, there you go. Look at that. I mean, so one of my favorite things about covers is like, it means something to you when you first crack the book, and then it means something different to you when you finish, and you kind of reinterpret the cover. I love that feeling of like looking at a cover once I close the book and thinking, oh, now I see.
Yeah.
But I mean, that thing, it's like, there's obviously a kind of heavenly aura in it, northern lights, or there's this kind of psychedelic drug thing, there's a wilderness thing. What's your take on the cover?
I love it. I mean, covers are hard.
Yeah.
I mean, if a book is like your baby, title matters, because when you've been working on it in a Word document and you've named it whatever you've named it, it's sort of like your baby being in mama's belly and having a name all picked out for it. And, but the cover is, also deeply personal, and Putnam did a great job. And Sally Kim, my editor, did a hell of a job sticking up for this cover, because it wasn't really the first choice. I think it's when you publish something that's of a genre, mm-hmm. they definitely want to plug into aspects of that genre. They want to give those little cues or clues. Mm-hmm. And so I think I saw like 5 or 6 different covers, and they seemed a little bit too, just slightly too pulpy for me.
Yeah.
But she had this cover and another sort of red version in her back pocket. And when she showed it to me, I was like, that's sold. Like, I got nothing. I have no suggestions. Please, can that be the cover?
I want to like frame it and like hang it in my house. I mean, it's beautiful.
It's really, it's really, really striking. And I've been, that's cool too, because I've heard from independent booksellers that it sticks out in the window for them. So, I mean, what is one of my buddies says, like, you can't judge a book by its cover, but you can buy a book by its cover. Right. You might want it. You'd rather have an attractive book on your shelf than an ugly one.
Yeah. All right, so I got so much I want to get into, including, as previously teased on social media, my unpacking of this structure of this book and comparing it to Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. But before we get to that, do you want to do a quick reading?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll just start from the top, from the first page. This was the house that would change their fortunes. They could feel it. Cole had barely steered his pickup off the highway and passed through an open cattle gate before they began climbing the dusty canyon road north, and they could feel it. Money, like a vibration in the crisp mountain air. It was humming out there, an expectancy, a promise, and they were driving toward it, cottonmouth, skin crawling. They could practically see it on the wind pushing the late summer leaves, swaying the yellowing meadow grasses, smiling down upon the dappled river water below. The whole world here looked like money, money just waiting to be plucked up off the ground, the leaves like greenbacks, the shimmer of the water like silver coins. They needed this house, this break. They needed this work for what sounded like as much as a year, maybe more. And not the thankless, backbreaking tedium they'd been reduced to for the past few years either. No, this was something to build a reputation on, a name, something to stake a man for decades, the kind of signature house a person could point to and proudly say, I built that, me, I built that. The kind of house that 30 years from now, when they were all broken down old men, they could travel to with their grandchildren and be welcomed like masters of some dying art. Bart rode in the passenger seat, blinking down at the chasm that had now fallen away just an arm's length from the gravel road, not even a mile off the highway, and already the country was wild, wild, wild. Below the road snaked a river, raging white and blue, cataracts tumbling, and above them, off the low mountainsides, wispy waterfalls spilled down like great lengths of silver white hair. A prominent dip of chew bumped out Bart's lower lip, and by he spit into an empty Coca-Cola can. I lived here almost 20 years and I ain't ever been down this road, he said, peering over at Cole, who took the gravel track with white-knuckled respect. A blown-out tire wouldn't just be a pain in the ass out here. It would put them behind schedule for their noon meeting with the homeowner. You ever been back here, Cole? Cole shook his head no, fixing Bart with a meaningful look for as long as he dared before turning back to the road ahead of them. This is big, pristine, private country, the look communicated. You and me, we don't just get invited back here.
My man. You know, I would say that's sort of like a masterclass in how to start a novel, but it's like it's sort of daunting to even bring it up as an example, because I think that, like, although it has all the hallmarks of, you know, what a great beginning has, it introduces setting, introduces characters, introducing the kind of the main thematic tensions. The prose is just sort of off the charts. I mean, you're doing things with the prose there, and I'm not going to nerd out on prose because we got other things to get to, but, you know, talking about the leaves like greenbacks and kind of the water like gleaming like coins. I mean, and like the way that everything is just kind of humming with money. You're doing so much of this kind of, you know, aspects of this book brought to mind The Great Gatsby. And I think that, like, in The Great Gatsby, you sort of have that same kind of thing happening, which is like this prose that is kind of like hitting on several different levels at once, and everything, even the individual adjective choices, are kind of reinforcing book-wide themes. It's just an incredible opening.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love I'm the kind of writer that definitely wants to establish the terrain right off the bat.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the, you know, I think about a book like East of Eden, where you just, all right, I know where I am. Okay. We got that out of the way. And
yeah, East of Eden, I mean, like, there's more Steinbeck here than Fitzgerald probably, but like that is, I'm so glad you brought up Steinbeck. I hadn't been thinking that until this moment. And I see our producer in the background, Jenna Blum, is going nuts, agreeing with that comment. All right, so let's just, I really want to talk about the story and the way it's put together, which is in a lot of ways the most fascinating thing. But I feel like before we get there, let's just talk about these characters. Basically, you got three guys who are the construction team, and then you've got this mysterious woman who is named Gretchen, who's the one who's funding the whole project. Now, you are known in your work for talking about male friendship. I happen to think this is an area which is sort of underserved by our current literature. I'm grateful that you write about this kind of stuff. But just, you can take that any way you want. Just talk about, I just really want to know kind of what drew you to these three guys.
Yeah. Well, I think, when we were building this house, I was on site every day, and I would come down and probably, harass the construction workers more than they really cared to talk to me. But a lot of them had gone to my childhood high school, and we had similar friends. We drink at the same bars and stuff like that. And what I noticed was that a lot of these guys were all characters. I mean, they just were characters. Like, I was telling somebody recently, there was a guy on the crew, and he would, no matter what I asked him, he would say, "Fuck yeah." Like, "How was your weekend?" "Fuck yeah." "Boy, the weather's not great today." "Fuck yeah." And like, you couldn't, I mean, it was like out of a Richard. Yeah, probably not.
That'd be a great interview.
It would be a great interview. Yeah, he was like a character in a Richard Linklater movie or something like that. So I was fascinated by by the position that they were always put in, by basically building, our house is not like the house in the book. But these guys worked on a lot of high-end construction. And what's that like, where you're not making a ton of money, and these guys would talk to me about their divorces and their drug problems. And so I knew who the construction guys were. I guess I'm always interested in male friendship. True. And then when I was thinking, in the early embryonic stages of the novel, I was thinking about, well, who is this homeowner? Why does she have this deadline, and where's her money coming from? And my wife is a very talented attorney, and she'd spent some time in a big corporate law firm. So we sort of knew a little bit what that life was like and how much you had to dedicate yourself to the firm. And so the more I thought about her experience, that's kind of how I started piecing together Gretchen, who I think of the guys as like the sort of wheels of the plot. Like, they move the plot forward where it needs to go. But if you didn't have Gretchen, you wouldn't have the heart of the plot. You wouldn't understand why this is so important. And that sort of gets revealed, slowly as you're reading through the book.
Yeah, and I'm going to be careful in what I say about Gretchen, because I know that, that's sort of a lot of the big reveal that you have, and it's a very slow and well executed reveal of what her motivations are. Like, why do you need to build a mansion in the wilderness in 3 months? It's a big, important question, and it is answered. But I just want to say, like, my wife also was a corporate lawyer, in fact, in San Francisco, which is where Gretchen lives. And so I was like, and I myself, years ago, worked in the media as a journalist covering Wall Street. And I just want to say, like, from both those experiences, like, I just found Gretchen, like, to be completely believable. I mean, she's not quite sympathetic. I mean, she's sympathetic in the way, as the old saying goes, that, anything that you can sympathize with anything that you understand. And so, as you come to understand her kind of as a byproduct, you begin to sympathize with her. But I mean, she's not a kind of a warm and fuzzy creature. But I would just say that, like, she was completely believable. I was like, as soon as you started talking to her about, like, oh boy, I know this kind of type. I mean, I think that, like, in that corporate world of big time white collar law on Wall Street, I mean, there's always an open invitation to basically work yourself to death. Yeah. And be one of these people who, at the end of their life, has spent the majority of their life inside a skyscraper. And so I just, I was very compelled by that character, and I thought she was extremely well drawn. There's a great quote. I love this. Her firm motto, quote, "Eat what you kill and kill everything you can." So anyway, I want to open the floor back to you and just say, like, I mean, is there something you were really trying to say about a character like Gretchen? Like, what compelled you to talk about her?
Well, I mean, this is a morality tale. I mean, I love thrillers that have a morality component at the heart of the book. I've talking about this book, I often come back to books that served as models for me thinking about writing the book, something like A Simple Plan or Treasure of the Sierra Madre, even a book like Deliverance. And in those stories, the characters are always offered the opportunity to do the right thing. They are repeatedly offered the opportunity to do the right thing. And they know what the right thing is. It's not like they're morally vacant, but they don't. And so then you just have this escalating problem. And, you know, the guys, the three friends, have their own moral question, which is basically like they're burning themselves out for money.
Yeah.
And Gretchen has a similar moral question, you know. Without getting too much away, she could step away at any time too, but she doesn't or can't.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many people kind of at the age that I am, you know, guys I know who I went to school with and know from childhood, who are in mid-career in corporate life and absolutely have the money, as Gretchen did at, you know, when she was that age, and as she does in this book, to step away and like stop working. But I think like that's what's so compelling and like hard to put your finger on around this whole book is like, so both for the three guys and for Gretchen, they're just basically kind of slaves in a way to this capitalist system, slaves to the money. And it does take this kind of heist structure of this kind of like suspense is building. They're like trapped by this series of events that keeps building. But it's not a heist. It's just capitalism. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, like they're not committing a crime. Gretchen is not committing a crime. She's not an outlaw. Like hardly any laws are broken here. There's a lot of drug use, and that's one thing. But like, you know, it's like drug use in service of, you know, doing the job. And so we also live in a culture which is about go get that money. And you know, they are just guys who signed onto a contract and in some weird way are just getting after it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, well, I don't know how you feel, but I just feel like everything right now in our culture, it just feels like there's like a money frenzy. There's things happening within the real estate market and on Wall Street and in politics where it feels like you're in one of those money machines and there's just cash flying all around. And as we get more and more plugged into social media and people are able to see those things, material things that they don't have, the more they want them. And so you're holding all these things in your head. And at the same time, you know that 40 or 50% of the country is like one flat tire away from being completely fucked.
Yeah.
It is a really bewildering time, I think. And I think these guys they're part of that. They're seeing their opportunity to seize the American dream or their versions of the American dream. And so they grab on and don't really ask any questions.
Right.
And Gretchen's desperately trying to fulfill her own kind of American dream or personal dream. And yeah, I don't know. I'm so proud of the book because to me, it just says it's like everything that's happening right now, you know, which is, you know, feels really edifying. Like when you finish the book in 2019, it comes out in 2021 and everything is still that way or more so. Yeah. You know, it's not like we decided in 2021 to all give up capitalism and materialism and save the world. Right. That really would have fucked my book. But
yeah, I mean, I just love the whole dynamic. It's sort of like we've all sort of been conditioned in this capitalist system, which is great in many ways. But we've been conditioned to kind of like just go for it. And here you have like all these main characters who are just sort of getting after it. And then you see like, well, carried to an extreme, this is what you get. You know, by the way, it occurred to me this morning as I was like thinking about this book that, again, without giving too much away about Gretchen, but there is something, I will say as vaguely as I can, there's something in the motivation of Gretchen to build that house, which reminds me of the motivation of Jay Gatsby in The Great Gatsby, the particular positioning of the house and what it's there for. You know, it did bring that to mind. I don't know if that's, I don't want to get into it too much because we might give something away, but that too, just kind of like it kept striking these great kind of American belles of, things that a lot of our great authors have hit on over the years.
Thank you. I mean, a writer will take that sort of comparison any day of the week. But yeah, I got to give some credit to my editor, Sally Kim, who pushed me, pretty hard to try to deepen the reasoning for why the house was there. I knew what the backstory was between Gretchen and her family and her parents and all that, but she pushed me just a little bit harder, and I got to give her credit for that. So.
Right on. And one thought about the house before we move on. But I mean, somebody was telling me recently just about kind of the way our society is today. I think there was some article they were referencing about how, it used to be you just live in your community and that was that. And, you just kind of measure yourself by those who are immediately around you. Maybe it was actually, I was listening to you say this, but, now with social media, you can just see how Kim Kardashian lives, and you can see how whoever else lives, and you think, well, why can't I have that? So it kind of supercharges your feeling of want. And on that very note, just the other night, I sat down with my wife to watch this show called Impossible Builds. And the very first episode, it's on PBS, or we watched it on Amazon or something, but like, it's about a prefab house that this British couple makes, that they put in like the remote Scottish Highlands. I mean, it's like this totally forbidding wilderness in the northwest Scotland, and they built this prefab house, and then they, like, at great difficulty, kind of drove it through these winding backcountry roads, and now there's like this super modern house overlooking this lake in the Scottish Highlands, and there's no house for miles around, and you can't get there half of the year. It just reminded me of your book so much, and it made me think like, oh, that's a perfect thing for this interview, because that's sort of exactly what someone like Gretchen would think. Like, hey, I've got a lot of money, there's a wilderness, I'll just put a house there,
Yeah, I'm totally blanking. Oh, Gary Schneider. Yeah, I always come back to this quote that my buddy Bill Hogseth, who works in political activism, working with a lot of Wisconsin farmers, he always brings it up. But Gary Schneider said something to the effect of, the only hope for America is that people stay within their neighborhoods and hometowns. And I think basically, and I'm butchering the quote a little bit, but the idea is like, well, that's how you build like a generational understanding of landscape and a history of stewardship. And, when we're all moving around and we're chasing jobs, you just lose that. And so on the one hand, you can feel sympathy for Gretchen, because she's trying in some way to find like what she had. Which was family and history. And on the other hand, it's this totally selfish 21st century instinct to just, well, because I can, I will just drop a house in the middle of nowhere. So.
Yeah, it's a great line in the book that we no longer live, to paraphrase, we no longer live in a nation of cowboy boots, we live in a nation of Nikes. And like, it's that kind of thing. Like, the Nikes have just pushed the cowboys out. But so I want to ask you about the structure of the book, which I love so much. And I do want to bring as promised, my Reservoir Dogs structural unpacking here. And so basically,
I can't wait to hear this.
So here we go. So first of all, it's this elemental story. So I just want to give props. Okay. Elemental story. You almost created this kind of like ancient biblical timeless thing. You have like, it's almost like a mysterious queen that finds three like yeomen to like do some impossible thing, and then it's a morality tale about like what they will do to get this impossible thing for this queen. It's like, it has all the aspects of kind of like a timeless, carved in stone parable about human nature. So first, props on that. But then, so as far as like, I was trying to think, like, I thought the structure worked really well, and I'm like, what is the structure of this book? And I thought, okay, so here's why. There's probably better examples out there, and I know you've talked about Treasure of the Sierra Madre as being a touchstone for you, but the reason why I thought it's like Reservoir Dogs is because Reservoir Dogs is a film that is about what happens after the heist. You start with the heist, but you don't even see the heist. It's like the immediate aftermath of the heist. And then the bulk of that story is about what happens to the bonds between these men as they try to get away with the money. Right. Yeah. And like what they will do to who's trying to double cross who's an undercover cop and so on. And like mayhem and bloodshed, and frankly, dismemberment ensues, which is something it has in common with your book. So here's the thing. I mean, like, so the heist in your book, the Reservoir Dogs heist, is actually the getting of the contract. Okay, so now they've got the contract, and so in a sense, like, the main one part of the heist is finished. They got the deal.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's like, can they get away with the money? And that's like the building of the house. Like, that's like the escape. And like in your book, like, frankly, the cops are involved. There's really bad stuff that happens as they're trying to make a clean getaway. And then in the end, sort of like, some will escape and some will not. And you got to stick around to the end and see all the violence and betrayal to see who really trusts who, and will they get away, and who will be punished for this crime. And so that's what do you see the Reservoir Dogs comparison now?
I love it, man. I mean, I told you before we got on live, like, I went to go see Pulp. I mean, people in my high school will tell you, even now, 20 odd years after graduating, I mean, I saw Pulp Fiction in the theaters like 8, 9 times. I don't even remember. People in the theater, people working at the theater recognized me. And from that, and I think I was like, I was studying Pulp Fiction to try to understand how he was building story, because when that movie came out and I was like 16 or something like that, I'd never seen anything like that. And then from there I began studying his other films, of course, including Reservoir Dogs. I had the poster of Harvey Keitel, leveling a gun at, I don't remember what Mr. it is. Tim Roth, I think, is on the ground. So I mean, fuck, I love that characterization. I mean, that's an amazing compliment. And I didn't think about it that way. I mean, and part of that is because, like, look, my attitude on writing is pretty self-effacing. I'm 42 years old, almost 42 years old. This is my 5th book. I still don't think I know anything about writing. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to pick stuff up from other people, and I'm still curious about what's happening in the books that I admire. I picked up No Country for Old Men the other day, and I was reading it, and I realized I needed somebody to talk to about my questions about that book. So I handed it to my wife, and I was like, would you please consider reading this book? Because I really need to talk to you about it. If I pretended to have all the answers, I wouldn't do shit like that. But so this was me experimenting with this genre and having some fun. And yeah.
Well, on that note, I mean, there is, I think, a grand false conceit about a divide, which in my opinion does not exist, between literary work and commercial work. And certainly I think it's I think I'll leave it to you. Feel free to dispute, but I think that you would be classified as a literary artist. Your first books were very literary. This book is definitely picking up genre tropes, and I think, like, there's a lot of great writers out there that do this. Celeste Ng is one who comes to mind. Certainly her first book, Everything I Never Told You, is like very, like, she throws a dead body on the first page, and it's a very kind of tropey unpacking of, like, what happened to this person. But, like, actually what she wants to talk about is the suburbs and racism and things like that. And and that book was an enormous success, and, like, set her career up. And I feel like we've got similar things happening here. Somebody with literary chops, things to say about this country, who's just like, you know what, why don't I put a hardcore ticking clock and super high life or death stakes and some action sequences into this book. Just so, opening the floor back to you, I mean, do you feel like this is a false divide? Do you feel like you're a literary artist or a commercial artist, or what is that?
Yeah, I mean, what's commercial? Things that are commercial, I guess, sell. Okay. In short. So, like, a book like No Country for Old Men, well, I mean, that's kind of commercial, I guess. It sold well. I mean, it's just full of dead bodies and bullet holes. Look, I don't really worry a whole lot. Maybe I should worry more about it. I don't know, but like, when I'm reading a book, there has to be enough happening in the prose on a molecular level to keep me interested. Yeah. And that's why, like, even though I love mystery novels and thrillers, there's some of those books that I'm not really interested in reading because there's just nothing on the page that's attractive to me at all. Like it's purely just a plot that moves forward. And there's, I think to me, like the term literary means that the writer is trying to pay some attention to the prose. And then beyond that, I'm not going to pontificate a whole lot, you know what I mean? But I think it's curious, like, you know, like a book like Gentleman in Moscow, which I love so much, you know, that's a very literary book. I think it's just a literary book, but it also happened to be like one of the most commercial books of its year. Right. So I don't know. I mean,
yeah, it's almost impossible to unpack, and for that reason, the true point I'm actually making, and which you're sort of like endorsing implicitly here, is that like this is a kind of false divide and a kind of an easy way to look at things, but it's just ultimately meaningless once you scratch the surface. But anyway, I mean, this book is absolutely using genre tropes that are like engineered to get a reaction from the human nervous system, and yet also you've got prose like the prose you read at that beginning.
I totally agree, and I'm sorry for not like zeroing in on it quicker, but it's like, it's also, you know, nobody in grad school ever really talks about the things that you can learn from commercial books. Right. But I mean, commercial books, I guess, are good at getting people to turn pages. So then I don't understand like why you wouldn't read Stephen King, for example, to understand like, well, what's he doing? Why do so many, what's successful here? Something is successful. You know, I look at a book like The Shining, scares the shit out of me. Great book, you know, and it's deep. It's talking about things that are, you know, underneath the words for sure. So yeah, and I read comic books too. You know, I'm reading all sorts of stuff, trying to pick up tips. I don't know.
100%, same here. And our producer Jenna is just a huge Stephen King fan. And Jenna, we see you dancing in the background as Nick waxes poetic on Stephen King. Anyway, look, one more question for me, and then we're going to move to some audience questions.
Sure.
You know, there was just something about your background that I just really wanted to pick up on, and this is a hard pivot in this interview, so do your best on this. But okay. You know, I know you're from kind of a rural area. You're from the Upper Midwest, and you know, ultimately you did go to Iowa Writers Workshop and everything. But I'm just wondering, like, you know, when I heard you talk about your career in some other interviews over time, I've kind of heard you talk about this feeling of being on the outside looking in, and sort of always wanting to be a writer, but just sort of like not being born to like as the son of a Manhattan book editor, and you know, whatever. I mean, you weren't born into this, and you were certainly on in the absolute, you know, way the boondocks of literature. So, to put a point on this question, how did you make it in? Like, could you say there's like one person who opened a big door for you, or one event? I'm really asking you to boil this down. One kind of event that like allowed you to slip into the castle, as it were.
I think it's all pretty much Iowa. Yeah. You know, I mean, if I had to answer real quick, I mean, look, there's all the people leading up to that before, like my mom, for example. Okay, would I be a writer without my mom? No, of course not. Would I be a writer without my 5th grade teacher, Doug Smith? No. My high school teacher, you know, Joel Rainey? No. But getting into Iowa was so important for my confidence, because up until then, you know, I had never really had any success in my life, but I could point to that acceptance and say, you know, to my mom or to my wife or to my in-laws, like, look, I think things are happening, you know, things are happening. I'm going to put in the work to make things go beyond this. But, and, you know, and I should also just say, like, I didn't know people growing up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where I could say like, oh, that's a novelist that I know who's like made it big time. And so I think that was made it harder for me to conceptualize things. But like a lot of the people that I was at school with in Iowa were also outsiders. You know, I think about my friend Marcus Burke, who grew up in kind of a hard neighborhood in Boston. He didn't know anyone either. You know, it's not just like, oh, I grew up in the Midwest or something like that. So I want to make that clear. But
yeah, it is hard. I mean, it's interesting in that story you tell. I mean, I think like any writer's journey is about like you got to have a few people who just out of kindness or for whatever, by coincidence, whatever, a few people who just open a few doors for you. But it's interesting, like the heart of your story is about the confidence and sort of the validation of getting into Iowa and how important that validation is.
Yeah, for sure. For me, that's true. And it also, I had sort of a different experience going through Iowa. My wife and son were living north of Minneapolis and I was commuting down. So I was really invested in like using my time appropriately. I wasn't down there to party all the time because I felt like if I didn't come out of that 2 years without a great book, like what was my wife sacrificing for? What was I sacrificing for? But yeah, I give a huge amount of credit to like, gosh, Sam Chang, who's still in charge of the program, Connie Brothers, who was like the program director, the secretaries who worked the front desk, James Allen McPherson, Jim Galvin. Like, you hear a lot of tough stories about how difficult it is at Iowa psychologically, but you don't hear the stories about they take care of you too. Like it's not easy for anyone, and they try to help people. They really do, and it wasn't easy for me. I was homesick for my wife and homesick for my kid and living in shitty apartments as a 30-year-old guy who was used to not living in shitty apartments. And they really made sure that I got it through. So
awesome. Great story. All right, let's do a few questions from the audience. If we can, just pop them up on screen for us. Since you finished the book prior to the pandemic, has the pandemic influenced your future writing or your writing outlook? Thanks, Christina.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Well, my writing outlook during the pandemic was not too rosy. It was like the worst 2 years of my life. I didn't realize how much of my like personality had become being a writer that was going out on the road and talking to bookstore owners and readers and librarians. And then when I couldn't do that, when I had to sit down with my freaking paper calendar with my bottle of whiteout and cancel all the events for 2020, it was just like, I just thought, oh my God, here we are. I can't go anywhere. I can't talk to the people that I care about. I was at home with my 2 kids who didn't want to learn from me. That was frustrating. So I didn't get a lot of writing done. It's only really just been in the last couple months where I can I feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
Everything. Sometimes I talk to writers and they're like, most productive time of my life. And I'm like, fuck you guys. Like that stinks.
Yeah. And I think, for a lot of writers, not everybody, but for a lot of writers, the act of writing a book is sort of an aspect of a career that is ultimately about community and community building. And like that community has just been ripped away from people in the pandemic. So,
yeah.
All right, here's another question. Let's get another question up there. Nick, a couple years ago, I met you at Literature Lovers Night Out, and you gave me a great piece of writing advice. You said, read everything you write out loud. Why is this helpful to you? Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Hey, Mary. Well, I mean, you can definitely hear the rhythm of things when you're reading it out loud. And you can also definitely, you find I don't know why it's true, but you tend to find your mistakes by reading things out loud. I think you will, reading it on the page or reading it on a computer, you just sort of gloss over your mistakes. But when you read it out loud, it forces you to slow down, look at things a little closer. I think you find those mistakes much easier. Yeah, and the rhythm thing I think is so important. That's something I credit my agent with too. He works with a lot of the nation's best poets, and he's always trying to get me to like find that sort of rhythm in my prose. James Galvin always compares the English language to riding a horse. He says it's the best language. I think short of maybe Italian might be in the conversation, but the English language can gallop like a horse. You just have to figure out how to do that. And I've always loved that.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. All right. Well, look, we're running short on time here. Unless there's another question, you can throw it up. But I'm going to actually move to my final question here, Nick. I asked this to all the writers that come on the show. And the question is this. So just imagine there is an ideal reader for this book, somebody who is just getting Godspeed in just the way you hoped it would be gotten, and they're picking up everything you're putting down. Now imagine this reader gets to the end of the book, closes the book. Just explain for me, if you can, in a phrase or a word, what is the feeling that that reader has finishing this work?
Like comprehension or understanding, I guess. Satisfaction. That's 3 words.
And sorry to like push a little bit more, but like, do you mean like comprehend, like satisfaction in a story well told, comprehension of the characters? Like, in what sense comprehension?
Well, I'll answer it this way. Like, I think I got done with writing a very serious late draft, and I didn't have the final chapter in there, and there was like something that was missing. And then I went back and thought about this character Lonnie Wilkins, who kind of appears like just for a chapter halfway through the book, but he's sort of important to understanding why everything is so important in the book. Yeah. And I think part of writing a good book is understanding that like you've put these things in motion, and then you have to remember that you've put them in motion and use them all. You know, and so I still had him in my back pocket, and I hadn't really utilized him. And then I thought, oh my God, well, all this time has gone by. Wouldn't it be cool if somehow he could come back, and like he's the only person left on the planet that would understand everything. You know, he wouldn't understand all the details. He doesn't know what the reader knows about the whole adventure that got it there, but he understands like the emotional heartbeat of everything that's happened before. And he's chosen to live a different life than Gretchen, though he wanted to be with her always. And I sort of love that you know, the bookending it like that.
Yeah, the ending of the book is amazing. It's great. It's one of these great things. It's like there's a lot of other books that do this, but like without mentioning all of them, but just like I think it's just this excellent technique where like you just sort of there's like 4 or 5 different landings in the book. I mean, you have several characters, and you have to kind of wrap up on each one, but like there was several moments I got to like at the end of a section, and I was like, like that's the end. And then it's like, oh, and then there's this one other thing, and you're like, that's the end. And then there was like, you had about 5 things in the air, and you like gently set each one down, and it was just so wonderfully done.
Thank you very much.
Right on, my man. All right, so folks, the book is called Godspeed. It's quite a read. I mean, if this interview doesn't convince you to read it, I don't know what will. I guess the best thing I can say about it, as I've said many times, is like it's a perfect hybrid of a literary work of art and something that has like kind of pulse-pounding genre tropes in it. It's my favorite kind of book. Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Honestly, I love that Reservoir Dogs comparison. I'll be thinking about that for ages.
Yes, it's so true. And there's much more there. I could have unpacked it long. I could have taught like a course on that. Anyway, but thank you, Nick, for coming on the show. Folks, we'll see you next week with Shelley Parker Chan and her debut book, which is already a bestseller internationally. She'll be here from Australia to talk about She Who Became the Sun. And we'll see you guys then.